Hey Vanessa, how you doing?
I'm okay. How are you?
Okay,
Good.
it's warm today. It's very nice.
So grateful for that. Feels like spring comparatively.
I know, I know. I think it's what, 50 degrees. I think the flowers are going to start to bloom.
I heard birds chirping earlier.
Oh, yeah, sure.
Hello, everybody else. Ellie, Alita, Theo. Theo, are you actually there?
Hey Vanessa, how are you?
I am here, just
Hi Dana.
a little out of
Hi.
range. One sec.
Gotcha. Hello, hello.
Yeah, Alita, I never met you, but I was in the program and graduated in the July 2020 segment. So
Great, congratulations.
yeah, but it's so great that they, let alums come in and listen to all these great craft talks and whatnot.
Yeah, I mean, but also totally like, yeah, great for community stuff,
Yeah, definitely.
right?
Yeah,
Definitely the most important part.
right.
All right, hello. How's everybody doing?
Okay.
So I have to confess, I have no idea what we'll do to commemorate the end of residency. I kind of can't imagine a Zoom party being what we want it to be. Or maybe we'll have like we'll toast at the end of our last thing or something. But I don't think we should bother trying to do a dinner in the cold.
Oh, gosh, that's true. It's really the wrong season for them. I'll send out a message later, but there will be a soft and gentle release of the literary journal tomorrow.
Nice. Hey, Daniel.
Wow, that's great.
Hello, how are you?
Great. How you doing?
Good. I had to go get some cookies just in case.
Nice.
You know, I was like, I'm jumping in from meeting to meeting. I was like, I need to pick me up. How are you doing?
Good. Same. We just had a pretty long session about, but this day 9 of 10. So.
Oh wow. Right on. I'm not like a total bookless savage over here. I'm in mid-move. So I'm in a echoey, empty room right now.
So the books are coming separate?
They've already been packed up. Yeah. No, we're exiting this
Exit.
this space. We're going full time. Did I tell you that we're going full time into an Airstream? Like one of those like art like campers.
Wow.
Yeah, my
Excellent.
son is in the 4th grade, and in the 4th grade, all the national parks are free for families because it's part of the curriculum, and he's been clamoring to see some, and I've been clamoring to size down all our stuff, and so it all kind of came together.
Wow,
So
that sounds exciting.
It's gonna be intense. I was allowed 12 books. I was given that challenge for all writers have is like, you get 12 books. What are you gonna take?
that actually.
Oh, no.
I mean, I clearly took an e-reader. I had to do that, although I hate reading on that. But I also took 12 gargantuan books, so I will not be finished. Here. So, goodness.
Well, that's amazing. Which are you most looking forward to?
Which book?
Park.
Oh, Park.
Oh. I was the book, but yeah.
Which book is funny? Which park is? I've never seen I've never seen the Everglades, and I worry about the Everglades, even
For
though
sure.
I don't own them.
Sure,
I mean, I do actually. The greatest thing the greatest idea is that we have public lands and that those national parks are every one of ours. I think that's just the bonkers idea. And if you ever watch the Ken Burns documentary on the national parks, it's called America's Greatest Idea, and I think it's a great title. And so I want to see the Everglades as soon as I can. But the book, golly, I'm finally getting around to War and Peace, which I've only read the first 50 pages of, and is hilarious. I had no idea War and Peace was like as funny as it is. It's always given this kind of, heavy doorstop descriptions, and it's genuinely so funny. And it's just the whole time he's sitting there just making fun of all these aristocrats. I mean, making fun in this, like, only as, one of the greats can, in the sense of just describing their personalities and their quirks and their foibles in just such precision that you immediately see them. It feels, it's wonderful. So I'm excited. I'm most excited about that, which is, and then I'm starting, that series that was a movie, but is a big seafaring series called The Master and Commander.
Yeah, I've always been curious about those.
So like every time I go to, anytime we go to a town, I was
Still
visiting
love them.
them. There's like a subculture around they're 12 books. They're not small, and they seem pretty serious about nautical facts.
Is it weird that I've avoided them because I get seasick? Is that weird?
Maybe one of the rare books that could make you seasick. They're so I'm gonna start it up. I'm really jazzed about those two. We'll see how it goes.
Nice. Excellent adventure, sir. Well, okay, so transition. What brings you here? These to this, and I don't mean just to St. Francis College, but so what's exciting about Daniel is he's worn a lot of hats in this world, and his journey is fascinating. And hearing about your plans for the present are fascinating in the scope of this journey. So what brings you to this this moment of rambling freedom?
Sure. Yeah, I guess I sort of lost roots really quickly and early in my childhood. So wings were all the only choice. But yeah, so very quick, I was born in Iran, where my mother got a fatwa on her head when I was young as a child, and so we became refugees. My father chose to stay. My mother and my sister and I escaped from the government. They were looking to, harm her. And so we ended up in the UAE at first, and then in a refugee camp in the outskirts of Rome, and then finally in Oklahoma. If you want to get into detail on any of this, that's the book I've just finished. And it's called Everything Sad is Untrue. But the part of it that's pertinent to the sort of the story and is that I didn't know English when I came to the United States. I had sort of picked up Italian was my second language because that's where we were. And so, but I had come young enough, I was, 8, where, let's face it, everybody kind of, brags about their kid. Like my kid could read at 4.5. And, so I'm sitting there with the 4.5-year-olds reading picture books and trying to catch up, right? I always joke that Dr. Seuss was my nemesis because he made up too many English words. And I really like this one dude named Russell Hoban, who just did like pictures of like balloon. I was like, I love this guy. He just tells you what it is. And so that really did make me fall in love with the library. Again, like it's all free. Libraries are free. It's unbelievable how much stuff is free in America. So that blew my mind. Like we were checking out books, sort of maxing them out. And so my first job when I was 13 was as a little page in that same library. By then I had gotten English, of course, and that was about 5 years later. And so the book world kind of got itself under my skin. Part of my job was in the library, we do this thing called like a lot of like permanent binding, where you take a book and you put like metal rods through the hardcover spine, you remove it from there, and then you rejack it. It's like a little task that we used to have in the 90s in libraries. And
I did that as well in college. Yeah.
yeah, it's like it's an interesting task. It's like it's very rote. But it's like if you know how to do it in the library, you get to stick around because it's kind of a specialized task. So I started doing that, and I knew very early on. I was like, writing was for me. I was telling the story of my childhood to basically, the parents of the kids I wanted to play with and whatnot, and sort of having to explain myself a lot. It's weird to be a refugee in the middle of Oklahoma and kind of still in hiding. And so I would tell that story a lot, and I really loved retelling it in different ways, just out of sheer boredom. And that got me sort of in love with the structure of storytelling and how you can really kind of tell the same thing in 100 different ways. And so when it came time for college, I knew, I was going to jump right in. So I went to NYU for writing. I sort of had heard that was the center of publishing, and I was kind of had that, what we call that immigrant mentality. So around sophomore, I did my first year, I got used to New York. My second year, I petitioned to push all my classes into the Tuesdays and Thursday nights, so that I could take on a full-time job, which was at a literary agency. This was the Carol Mann Agency. I had interned previously there, and they needed a foreign rights manager. And of course, foreign rights is, as when you publish a book, you own the copyright. You're fundamentally only giving permission or license to the publisher to publish your work, and the definition and limitation of that license is very, very important. So no limitation, well, they can do that whatever they want with that story, but usually the most limited version would be English language, because that's the primary language in the United States, North American, so that's the territory of distribution, and so English language, North American print rights or hardcover rights, and then paperback rights would be like the most basic thing you would have to give them, right? You don't have to give them audiobook, you don't have to give them film, and you certainly don't have to give them like translation. And if you don't, and your agent retains that translation, then you get someone like me in-house sending your work out to our publishers in Poland, our sub agents in the Japanese territories, and trying to figure out how to sell it, right? Territories are really, really specific. There's just, you are not going to sell certain topics in certain territories. I remember at the time, to give you a sense of what was happening in the world, Eminem was the toast of the town. He sold in Poland like you wouldn't believe. The Polish forever have my heart. They gave me my first foreign deal for the biography of one Mr. Marshall Mathers, and that was the first time I made any sort of agent money. And Carol Mann Agency is a very serious adult literary agency. We had some Pulitzer Prize winners and like Tim Egan. We had a lot of literary folks like Paul Auster, if you know his work, and Paul, he's another one who sort of was so easy to sell because he actually sells better in France than he does in the US. He's a really rare author in the stateside who has a bigger following elsewhere. It's kind of a cool thing to have. And so that's what my job was. And for 3 years while I was at university, that's what I was doing. It was really funny because by my senior year, sort of my professors were asking me sort of publishing questions, because an agent's job is to negotiate contracts, right? So you really get down into the nitty-gritty of it. But after 3 years, I graduated, and my boss, who I sort of sat in the same room with, she was this like hardcore agent. Her name is Carol Mann. She's still working. She's great. I saw her negotiate a 52 book deal once with Penguin at the time. And so like I got a real interesting insight into it. Now, of course, the other end of that is I was in the same room with her, and so she got to watch me try to negotiate contracts, which led her to two conclusions, which she told me. One of them was, "Hey, you're not very good at being an agent," and it was a really kindness that she did pull me aside. She didn't say it so bluntly, but she said two things. One is, you don't really like negotiating very much, and I said I don't. I admittedly am not a fan of haggling, which runs counter to the stereotype of my people. And the other is that you kind of have an editor's disposition. And I said, what do you mean? And she said, well, look, an agent reads a book and she hates it. She thinks it's trash. She's like, this is cliche. It's not funny. What is this? But in her heart, she goes, it's not for me, but I know exactly who it's for. And I'm gonna connect that book with that person. That's the agent's like fundamental statement. An editor's statement, to her view, is slightly more childish, is I don't know who this is for. It couldn't be for anybody. It's like, and what she really means is an editor falls in such monomaniacal love with their list, which is a distinctly smaller list than an agent's, that they are the kid who wants to play with their one favorite toy over and over and over and over again. That's the editor, because an editor reads the book 7 times before it comes out, right? That's a lot of times. People pretend like they're like, oh my gosh, I've read Lord of the Rings 200 times. It's like, no, you haven't. You've probably read it like 12 times, but it feels like 200 times because every run through of a book is a serious endeavor. 6 times, 7 times to go through a manuscript as an editor is a lot. You really have to have a particular disposition. And she was like, I think that might be for you. I'm sorry that I'll quickly go through this part. So I said, okay, let's do it. I graduated. I was lucky enough to have those 3 years of experience. So I started as an associate publisher editor, as opposed to an assistant editor. The distinction is you have editorial assistant, assistant editor, associate editor, and so on and so on.
Keep climbing. This is good to hear, and feel free to slow down. Like, this is great.
Oh, yeah. Okay. I apologize. Tell me if ever I'm retreading any information that's
no. It's great to hear. So the levels are
entry level is editorial assistant. Your tasks are going to be almost fully administrative, which is to say you're going to be filing, you're going to be sending out those contracts. In some cases, you're going to be handling correspondence. You're also going to be taking a look through what gets affectionately called the slush pile. But when you read something and you like it, you're sending it up the chain. You're giving it to your associate editor, who's probably the person managing you. You do that for 3 years, 5 if it takes you a long time to get a hang of it, but you're probably going to get that assistant editor. So it's editorial assistant, then assistant editor. This assistant editor and editorial assistant, sometimes if they're getting ready for the jump, they're doing a little bit more in terms of touching the book, right? They're going to be the ones probably writing the first draft of the cover copy, which is, the back of the book. They're going to be the ones running through all the publicity materials to like pull out the pull quotes, which, there's an art to. It's something you have to kind of learn. They're going to be the ones who do that second read and maybe starting to present. If an editor wants to buy something, say, they might let their assistant editor present the book in-house to start to get the what we call the soft skills in editing. One of the most important, if not the most important soft skill for an editor is what gets sort of called shepherding the book. Shepherding the book is basically talking about the book to other people who don't know about it, don't necessarily care about it, and whose jobs are on the line to pick the ones that are best to deal with. Yeah. So there's a fundamental like competition among editors to be able to shepherd their projects through. And when they pitch them, I've seen editors go, in this book of wonder and mystery, there is a family who comes from Thailand. They are in love with their dog. And look, I don't mean to diss that. I've done that when I was super nervous and super young. And that's what the mentorship of a good associate editor is all about. They'll pull you aside and say, hey, good writing, good presentation of the thoughts, clear, concise, excellent. We got to talk about how you're shepherding this book because you're making it sound boring and you can't do that. Most of the people in this room They're the suits. They're the ones who go into the sales calls to sell the book. They're the ones who are calling up Good Morning America to pitch the book. And the way you're talking about it makes it seem like it's just watching paint dry. Whereas you get somebody else, one of the greatest extemporaneous pitch women I've ever seen is currently the head of First Second. She does graphic novels. She stands up there with like classic, like a great fighter, great boxer, hands behind her back, like nobody's in danger. And then she just speaks about a book without any notes in sight. And you're listening going, I want to read that book. That book sounds amazing. And I'm awash in books. And then she'll go to the next one and be like, this next, and it's just one after another. It sounds like the great, she is a born storyteller. And so you're going, this is what that soft skill is all about. And you really do have to pick it up. So that's when assistant editor starts to be thinking about in addition to their administrative tasks. Then you get that jump over to associate editor. That's the first time you're going to get to actually maybe acquire a book. But it's not going to be exactly what you think. It's not going to be like, I'm going to go throw down $1 million and pick up the next Donna Tartt. It's, okay, we have this guy in the house. His author is left, and now the book has kind of been orphaned a little bit. We need you to shepherd the last 3 stages to it. That's what our associate editor is going to pick up. Or she handles the paperback, rights. And in the paperback, that author, she's got to do like a 10th anniversary introduction. She's going to edit that for the first time. That's some really nice touches that an associate editor gets to have with the experience. Editor, that's the first time you just went from having to please your manager to you have to please the marketplace, because the editor is the first time you get your own list. That's a very important thing, because a list is the entire lifeblood of an editor, to speak in the terms I think about sometimes, which is the marketplace. It's the first time you have power, because an editor has a stable of authors, and that's what they bring to the table. If they leave your house, some of those people might go, and that's really important. I'll give you one story. One of my favorite stories is the HMH, Houghton Mifflin Harcourt, one of the legendary backlists. They've got Tolkien, they've got, I think they have Donna Tartt too. They've got Anais Nin, they've got the Gunter Grass, they've got you name Italo Calvino, the great one from my perspective. And on the kids side, they've got just, you name it. New CEO comes in, hedge fund guy. I don't like him. He doesn't know what he's talking about. He comes, looks at the salaries. There's this woman, her name is Drenka, legendary editor. She's in her 80s. Drenka is about this tall, wears giant hats, and comes from Eastern Europe. She's just got the most swagger ever. This explains to you the power of an editor, right? She, first thing he does is go, wow, she's making a lot of money. Zip, so he lays her off. Drenka doesn't say anything. Drenka doesn't argue. Drenka gets up, walks out. An hour later, the assistant to the CEO gets a call, comes running into his office and goes, sir, we have a call from Gunter Grass. In case you don't know, Gunter Grass is a very reclusive German Nobel Prize winner who hasn't spoken to anyone at this publishing house in about a decade. And about 15 minutes later, Drenka gets a call. And about 20 minutes after that, she comes walking in right back through the door, because not only did she get her job back, she got it in spades. And guess what she'd been doing for that hour and a half? She'd been hat shopping. So that's why editor is such a different position than associate editor. You are the liaison. You are the person who, in some ways, what they call the minder of make-believe on the kids' side. And it really is a beautiful position, because it's the position that fights for the editors in-house. So you start to build your list. You get promoted if it promotes well. Then you go from senior editor goes to executive editor. Executive editor is the first time you start managing the brand, which is the imprint list. That's when and you're the one who other editors, all those juniors below you, are coming to in order to say, I want to pitch this to the sales team. And you say, it's not really an FSG book. It's not really a Roaring Brook book. And then they have to leave. That's the boss you got to deal with. If you make it past that sort of imprint room, that's when it goes to the acquisitions meeting. The acquisitions meeting is the, you know, the mythical meeting where that young editor already has the approval from her executive editor, goes in, there's the publisher is sitting there, the head of sales is sitting there, head of marketing, head of publicity, probably head of international sales, and even head of, and then of course, the, you know, the head of finance or the CFO, whoever it might be. And they pitch. And again, shepherding comes into it. This book is amazing. Why? Well, blah, 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 blah. Everything they say is, I mean, the life of that book changes in that room. Because they, you know, I've seen people pitch so well that someone goes, well, dadgum, this sounds like the next, you know, this sounds like the next Rarden. Like, why aren't we buying 5 of their books? And the answer is like, good question, why not? And they'll say, all right, let's do 100 times 5. And it's like, wait, did you just times 5 the deal because you're excited? And the answer is like, yeah, that's the room. Whereas, of course, it can go the other way too, right? Bad pitch, bad room. Don't we have enough road trip music books right now? And it's like, yeah, well, we do, you know, and blah, blah, blah. All the politics, all the game happens in that room. And publisher is the one who finally has to decide. So that's the track. I ended up as an associate editor at what I didn't know was the most notorious imprint at the time at HarperCollins. It was run by a woman who was the most successful publisher of her era. Her name is Judith Regan. She's the one who, well, I was the one who edited the Jose Canseco Juiced book, which was the first book to cause a congressional hearing because it outed everybody as being on steroids in baseball. But she did books by Howard Stern and Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, and she was, as you can tell, pop culture, celebrity culture. She did one of the books on that in the presidential campaign. That was, you remember the 2 hit piece books that came out? One was called Unfit for Command, and the other was called Unfit Commander. It was Bush Kerry. She did one of those books. She did. So she was sort of, you know, like front of the news cycle. She was from the tabloid world, the National Enquirer. She also published, for what it's worth, some killer literary stuff. She did Wicked, which turned into, you know, a musical that did well. And she did Jess Walters, who won the National Book Award a couple times, once maybe. So she just had a really broad list, but it was very, very commercial. I didn't love the content, but I loved publishing. So I ended up leaving after a while. I was really lucky, though. It was because it was like a bestseller house. My first 5 books were bestsellers. And so that really set the tone for my career. And I really credit Judith for that. So I went and became a pastry chef. During that time in the book world, I was a copy editor for Simon & Schuster, copy editing a lot of their paperbacks, everything from like Star Trek books to 50 Cent had a 10-book deal to a biography of Houdini, stuff like that. But around that time, I wanted to get into kids. So 5 years after that, I applied for the editorial job at Houghton Mifflin Harcourt, which I sort of described. It's a much quieter house, very literary, very traditional. And so my job was to put together really, what's the word, sort of like old school picture books, middle grade books, and YA. I really loved it there. I have really old school sense, but people kind of look at me and they're like, oh, you know, you must like edgy stuff. And I'm like, I'm kind of really into, you know, pretty, you know, Beatrix Potter type stuff, like send me sweet things. So it took me a while to tell agents what I was really hoping for. But after about 4 years, the ebook boom was taken over around 2013. People were saying, you know, ebooks are going to be 75% of the marketplace. Because they had gone from 8 to 13 to 25 in almost a 3-year window. Amazon was coming out with their new Kindle. Nook had just landed, and of course the Sony reader was still a thing. And iPad had not yet existed, so no one knew how to do picture books just yet. Or it was in the works. So every house was building their e-division. And at that time, ebooks weren't even coming out day and date. So when the book released on a particular date, the ebook wasn't out yet. So because they were doing that, they were like, hey, you seem sort of digitally interested. Would you like to do that? so I left I went over and helped start the digital division. I was digital editorial director, which is a big jump. It means I skipped over senior editor. But it was a new burgeoning industry. To be very honest with you, it was a drop in cachet. Like you go from being editor, heir to the great Drenka, you become the guy who's trying to figure out how ebook files work at Amazon, right? So it was a drop in that space. I had a kid coming, so my wife did, of course, and so you take the gig that pays, and I did, and I was really pleased that I could, because one of the things I could do was pitch them on new digital products. And at that time we had David Wiesner, the illustrator, who does these wonderful picture books, and he wanted to do an app. We said, all right, let's do it. We had Curious George, so we built some Curious George apps, but then we also got to do like really fun stuff, I mean, the David one was amazing and fun, but I got to go through the backlist and just be like, what are the stuff that people might digitally want? I think I was of that generation that Princess Bride was such a big deal to, and a lot of the editors weren't necessarily. So I was like, hey, the 25th anniversary of Princess Bride is coming up. Like, we have to do something. And I was like, really? I was like, I'm telling you, the Princess Bride. I mean, and so one of the best jobs I had was to pick the illustrator who was going to get to illustrate the edition, which is out if you want to see it. And I call this kid and I tell him, I'm thinking it's going to be one of those like jumping up and down, screaming phone calls. And halfway through telling him, I realized he'd never seen The Princess Bride. I was like, so do you not know what I'm talking about? And he's like, no. And I was like, do me a favor and do not watch this until you're finished. So when you see the illustrations, it's actually kind of charming because they don't look like Carrie Elwes and I forget the actress' name. But going on from there, I had been building products. And so I got a call from a nonfiction sort of gifty publisher to try out to be their editorial director back into the print side, back into doing books. And I got the gig. And so there I created a team where it was designers and editors coming together to create all kinds of products. They were like nonfiction books, everything from like study guides to like sticker books and, the history of crustaceans, just it's sort of fun, educational nonfiction. And that was gorgeous. We did that for 4 years. And right around that time, we had enough success that Macmillan, one of the big five, sort of was able to offer an imprint, which is kind of the goal. You're always dreaming dreams about that. And I got to be publisher there and create an imprint. You get to set the mandate that your executive editor then builds the list around, right? That whole thing that we discussed. And so that was lovely. It's called Odd Dot. It's curious books, joyful books for curious minds. And they do that sort of thing, like outdoor books about knots, just really joyful, highly designed nonfiction and how-to and stuff like that. So I loved all that. During that time I was writing, you can imagine there's a parallel life here, and I was writing my books. And finally, after about 3.5 years at Odd Dot, I was able to step down and pursue writing full time. That was 8 months ago. So we're up to the present. And yeah, that's what brings me here. Yeah, long answer.
Good. No, great. So that was we especially breezed past Act 3, it feels like. So maybe we could slow that down, because that sounds like a huge jump for a lot of us who are writers.
Yeah.
To go into writing full time from.
Well,
so I'm just curious with the experience of publishing Everything Sad was like, especially considering how much behind the scenes kind of savvy you already brought to the table.
Sure.
And like your role is, so you were actually a publisher of an imprint when it hit the shelves. Is that right? Yeah.
It was COVID, so it hit the shelves and I got to watch on TV. But yeah, so going back, I mean, Everything Sad was the book that admittedly allowed me to kind of think about the possibility of going full-time, but it by no means was my first book. So if you go all the way back to when I was at, copy editing at Simon and Schuster, I co-wrote a trilogy that sold. And, that was around the time I was still pretty young. So like my budget was really low. And like I was living in an apartment with 3 guys, my rent was $400 to sort of give you real numbers. And
So I'm interested because I also co-write. What went into the decision to co-write, to partner up?
Honestly, I was writing childhood, youth, the folly of youth is the short answer. But I had written at college, I had written this novel. It was kind of like my love letter to the state of Oklahoma, where I grew up. It was like football. Literally jokingly, I pitched it. Not jokingly. I'm sorry. I is a joke now, but I pitched it as Voltaire meets Varsity Blues. So it was a literary football novel. And I will tell you what happened, although it really sort of embarrasses me now. I was really proud of it, and it had gotten some nice attention from my professors, and my professors were the type who, of my previous work, told me to stop immediately, right? Like, there were some really mean folks. And they were kind to it. So I finished it, and right after college, I sent it out to agents. And again, bad advice. I just didn't have good mentorship at that time, I don't think, because I didn't do a large selection of agents. I sent it to 3, Salman Rushdie's agent, Italo Calvino's agent, and I forget who the third was, but like someone that's like, come on, like these people, one, they're not running agencies the way that like young Daniel was running for, even Carol Mann, who was at the height of her powers. Like, she's selling books by new people. That's an active agent. There are other agencies that are like managing estates, okay? And when you're managing the estate of like a Hemingway or like Flannery O'Connor, like, that's just not the same thing. These people are not going out to lunch with editors right now trying to figure out what young people are want. It's just not that. And so now the Rushdie agent and also, let's admit, like, they have their players. And so a better piece of advice would be to find somebody who's just I wouldn't say low, just earlier in their career, the way you are, not the junior most person necessarily, but somebody who's got a few hits that, they're making their living. But they're hungry. They're going to be looking for more in that vein. Like, an agent can sell way more than an author or an editor can do, right? So, she would be happy to get somebody who's akin to one of the, so for example, like the agent of Where the Crawdad Sings, she's going to want a book that's akin to that. Why? Well, because 5 other editors had their heart broken when they didn't get that book. And guess what they sure would like? They would like the other book. So like, that's such an easy sale for an agent, right? And so that kind of just awareness of who I should send it to wasn't there. And here's the part that makes me feel really bad, because what happened was, out of nowhere, I got a call from this guy who has no business calling some like 19-year-old. Like, he was really an established individual. And I really find that extremely kind now. And for an hour, he spoke to me about my book. And the upshot of this book, and by the way, I am so hopeful that he's calling to offer me a representation, that as I realize it's not in the cards, what he's doing is he's giving me really good notes. It's like that wash of just like shame and sadness. And like, I couldn't even tell you what half of what he said was, but the notes were, it's a little too literary for the football crowd and a little too much football for the literary crowd. So why don't you go ahead and like deal with it? But he gave me real good notes. I put down the phone, not realizing that, again, if someone older than me, I would have slapped this 19-year-old version of Daniel, because the reality is that wasn't a rejection. What that was an hour of this dude's time. And it was an implicit invitation to go spend the next 6 months fixing my novel. And send it back to him. And I look back and go, wait a minute, like, was that really a possibility? Was that, and I think about, sometimes what life would look like if I had been a little wiser, or had somebody tell me. I'm not too, I'm not sitting here just like beating myself up about it, but it was clearly a moment where good advice would have helped. And because I thought he'd been kind, but he had basically said, like, this place isn't for you, kid. And really what he had said was, with his time, he had said I was worth a phone call. And that should have meant something different. So I thought I had sort of totally failed on my own. And there was this opportunity to write this sort of YA fantasy trilogy, and I jumped on it. And then, and that was around the time where a lot of my friends were like going full time. They were like, they were going to hustle and write full time and keep a really small budget and stuff like that. And I, I had different priorities, and I wanted to write. And so I wanted to get married. And so I kept the day job. I wrote that trilogy. Off of that trilogy, I ended up writing another, a solo project, which was a collection of 4 novellas, each in a different genre. Again, no one told me that just because you can sell it doesn't mean. So that book, it's called Straw House, Wood House, Brick House, Blow. I'd come off of a really commercial trilogy of YA books, and this was a very literary endeavor. And again, collections are just the hardest thing to sell, especially if you're a nobody like me. And so I was like, I joke that it got the best reviews I could have dared hope for and the worst sales I could have dared imagine. It's to this day, I think it's sold about 1,100 copies, right? Which is not a number that gets you more book deals, unfortunately, for me. And so I spent the next 8 years kind of just putting stuff out there, trying to submit, and just kind of getting nothing, getting crickets. And around that time, I was also realizing that my agent and I had just really different goals, different perspectives. It's a good example, actually. She was sort of, again, later in her career, had all her successes, had been kind enough to sell that trilogy in my solo project. But, I'm out here going like, okay, so I got this graphic novel idea. And she's like, I don't know any graphic novel people necessarily. And I was like, okay, and really what I needed to do was, again, find somebody that was a little bit more of in my cohort. And I so it took about 11 years before I published again. And that was, so I did sorry, I should be super clear. It took 9 years before I published again. Under a pseudonym, I did some work for hire YA stuff, which did fine for itself. Work for hire, you don't have any ownership or back end. So you get a paycheck and you write it, and then they go and do whatever they want with it. So, but from what I can tell, it was fine. I could probably have kept doing that, though the money's never super awesome in work for hire. And so after about 11 years, I had finally finished. I had written a lot of things, but I finally had finished the big one for me. And I mean, big one is in like quite literally, it was like 450 pages. It was kind of something I'd poured myself into in terms of research and revision. And that's what Everything Sad was. And so, so there was kind of this, the doldrums time was between Straw House and Everything Sad. And, fully to admit, like, it was partly a commercial problem, right? In the sense that I had sold so few books that other houses would look at some of the track record and say, wow, what's wrong? But you eventually get out of the doghouse, and I think I probably might've been able to get out earlier if I had sort of turned myself toward something a little bit more, I don't know, what is the word? Like just something that like has a clear market, that's very different than writing to a trend. But I really kind of like my little weird corner of the world. Like Everything Sad did come out. It came out while I was publishing it. It got good response and stuff like that. But I'm sort of going straight back into my world, and I hope now more people will. I mean, the danger I'm in now is Straw House is the kind of stuff I like to write. It's, you know, they're odd little historical fantasies. They're, they're really heavily researched. They tend to be really what I think of as very comedic and fun. I'm Italo Calvino, like junior varsity, right? And stuff like that. And so I would hope that some of that, audience will translate over and come over. But, in the world of publishing, it's sort of, it's always about cultivating, developing, and maintaining a conversation with an audience, right? And that doesn't have to be mercenary. It can be. You can sort of see it as like, let me dance to the tune of commerce, or as it is with, some of the great writers of our time, like Toni Morrison fundamentally built an audience that came with her to every book. And I'm telling you, if you look at her correspondence, like fans, so to speak, it's an odd word, but like readers of her work wrote to her, and, like they continue to, like, it really does oddly become a continued conversation. If you're a little bit like me, the difficulty is I'm kind of all over the place. Like I love comics and I love literary. I'm too much football for the literary crowd and too literary for the football crowd, right? And in that sense, it's been very challenging for someone like me to find a coherent group of people who even know my name or can say, oh, hey, I read his previous book. I like that. It's just because you read a memoir of a refugee, you might not necessarily want a graphic novel about a, marketplace full of magical objects. And if you do that, you might not like a film about a husband and wife in, the throes of their marriage. And if you like that, you may not like a picture book that's entirely a palindrome. So, that's a challenge. That's where we are
To the
now.
extent, I don't know if you consider Everything Sad a breakthrough, could you attribute that to anything? And have you ever thought about maybe, pen names or the disappearing author trick of some other mediums like film where, the author's name doesn't matter?
I tried that. So Joyce Carol Oates was at HMH as well. She famously has like the most pen names. Her editor once pulled me aside and goes, she's got 3 books on this list and none of them are under Joyce Carol Oates. I was like, daggone, that's like, you kind of just have to respect that kind of move. She's so talented that like she literally under 1 million different names keeps paying her dues, right? For me, I ended up coming to peace with that. During my work for hire, that's what I was up to. I was like, okay, what if I can JD Robb famously is the pen name of a woman who writes under another name as well. And I was like, what if I could pull something like that off? And I realized there is a thread in what I love, and it does maybe center itself around that book, Everything Sad, because that's the most me. But I like to believe that if I can just have the opportunity to make enough projects, there will be a coherence of some sort, even if that coherence is the sound of a particular kind of laughter. That to me is what I'm shooting for. I will fully admit to you, Theo, like this is one of those moments where as the publisher, it's like doing surgery on your own kid. I know, like I would not advise myself necessarily to do that. But I ended up being a little, it's just too unruly in the sense that, I kind of sat down with my agent and I was like, if the quote, if we have to talk brand, then the brand has to be versatile. That's it. Because if it's not, like, I literally can't do the same. I just can't. And so what are we going to do? We're going to just like take an anagram generator and make up a different name for every project. Like at some point that wears thin. Like that tends to work when you've got like, I'm a middle grade fantasy writer and I also want to do adult murder mysteries, or I'm a, sci-fi writer and I also want to do like swashbuckling romance. Like when there's a real coherence within a persona, then make the persona. But there wasn't even a title to title coherence with mine. And so it was like, oh, well, then unfortunately, because I am not a particularly talented or desiring of publicity, I'm not particularly excited about that. It does still have to be centered around myself to the extent that my name has to be on it. But yeah, so, and the reason for that is that would be the only connective tissue, right? Yeah, so that's sort of it. But if, someday, if it was just like I have a whole series of adult mysteries, then I would have zero problem, and I write under several different names.
Oh, that makes a ton of sense. And I think with, when what everything sad can kind of do, because it's so it not just introduces your life story, but also your taste and your sensibility, that could be the opening to the corridor of all your fun ideas and projects.
That's the hope, right? I mean, so many people do it in different ways. Like another way of saying it is, what would you talk about if you were sitting in a room with your favorite writer? Like, I get the feeling if I was sitting down with Terry Pratchett, and we were just eating, I get the feeling we would talk about all the things I love best about his books, right? Like, we talk about like how like, just like we talk about like in the news, we'd just probably make fun of goofy bureaucracy. He would probably tell me, like, I just think this way. I think he would be very funny. I think so. Independent of like, this is how I think about it, because I don't like thinking about it in terms of like, how do you brand manage? But fundamentally, it is a question of how do you manage the conversation around your work and around yourself with people. Like, what do you like to talk about with people is fundamentally going to be something that a large group of people are excited about doing with you, and your book is the first statement, and you'll have people reacting to it, right? And longevity in publishing, in some ways, I've come to realize, requires that much more than, say, sales. It requires there to be a conversation that you are curating with people, and at its best, it's about the big thing,s right? Those, it's about the sentences, the meaningful things you want to say in this world. I don't want like the language of branding to invade that. I actually want the language of conversation and art to invade the branding conversation. You know what I'm saying? But that is going to happen. Eventually that becomes a task that, you don't want to think of it because you're in the throes of, maybe the first novel or the second novel, but eventually, as you say, okay, but I'll be, God willing, writing a novel every year until I die. And they won't finish one a year, maybe, or maybe I'll finish 2 a year. Like, who knows? How do you sort of manage all of those? If they're lucky. I would like to be clear, like, I think more novels I've written have not been published than have. So, I'll manage a lot of them as files on my hard drive, but some of them I will get to manage as like continuing a process. And again, once again, I keep saying inshallah, I keep saying God willing, because it's like so much of that is out of your hands. So much of that is a librarian finding it, and she just goes, I get it. And then the next book comes out and she takes a look, and, and you'll hear from people, you'll hear from people who are like, I liked your first book. And by implication, what's up? What are you doing? What's going on with the second thing? And you kind of have to say like, well, this is the part that, I mean, you end up having to explain yourself a lot. And so, and you never would, I mean, you really never would if you never have to explain yourself if you're someone like, golly, who's a good example? Someone who's just like Lee Child's a good example, or Lee Bardugo, the two leads. So I mean, in the sense that she built a world, and like the next book's going to be in that world, right? At least for the first like 8 before she just recently did one out of world. But
right, and did she do an adult? Maybe she had to explain it. So
the ninth gate, yeah, but she did. I was in the room, and so but But what you're doing is you're building, and more people, building more people to want to come see it, right? To see this world. And interestingly, what she has to explain to her audience more than anything else is what the characters are up to, right? And there's something that's the conversation she wants to have. She wants to have a conversation of like, yeah, but what if this guy? What if we shipped these two? Which, you know, what if? And that's a lovely conversation. She's fundamentally, like, in some ways, building her audience wants to sit down and almost play with her, and that's the value to me, or at least it's the, like, the part that's really sparkly of the idea of building a big fantasy world. Like we all kind of feel like we have opinions on how Game of Thrones should go. That's the conversation George R.R. Martin is sort of cultivating, you know?
Sandbox.
Yeah.
Plan.
So that's I think, you know, it really just comes down to what you end up wanting to write.
Great. I wanted to open it up to questions. You guys want to raise your hand or just throw it in the chat? Anything sparks thinking about your own processes and.
Okay, this is like a really nuts and bolts question that just so I've been adjacent to a lot of the worlds that you're talking about, but like totally adjacent. So I just want to know something like, what was your thoughts when you were like reading like someone else doing BCC for your book after having written it for so many others, or did you like write it yourself, and did you like take the first shot at it, or? I mean,
oh God.
Yeah, that's curious. No, I'm curious about that because you've been on every side of it. You've been like on every side of the desk.
Yeah, that's been an interesting thing, because I try really, really hard not to meddle with my agent, right? Because not only sometimes do I know the sort of the motivation, even in some ways that she might not. Like, we've had a lot of really nice, insightful conversations about what gets publishers, like what publishers are up to in some ways. But I try really hard not to. I will say this might be my disposition, but I'm a sensitive soul. It really hurts my feelings, actually. Like when a lot of the conversation around my own book would like really hurt my feelings to hear, to be honest. And I know that about myself. Like, I don't go on Goodreads. I've never once been on the Amazon review page of my book. I did that with some of the previous books, and that's how I know this about myself. Like, I would shut myself down for a month, and it's cognitively, like, I am super aware that I am not above reproach. I am super aware that there is negative criticism to be had. That's not, you know, it's not as if that I'm not surprised, you know, but I also know my own mind and my own self, and they really are that important to me. They really are that, they're kind of all I've ever made, right? So the idea of watching that kind of conversation happen around my book, I have excised myself from all of that, and it's probably for the best. Because sometimes you do have to talk about, I've been on the business side, you have to talk about it, not as if it is the darling child of some proud parent, but rather as a piece of commerce that has a potential, revenue of a very finite number. And that a marketing dollar, for every marketing, dollar you spend, you really have to make 7 back in order for it to be worth anything. If you do the math on that, and how like $100,000 market spend is implying a gigantic return on investment. And there are times where $100,000 market spend is a death knell for a book. And it's a rare time. It's most of the time, like, more is more. But there are some odd edge cases where you go, if we hadn't spent that last $200,000, this author would be in a much better position. And you go, yeah, that's true. At that point, that's just bad business. Nobody wants to be in that situation. So do I ever want to be in that? No, for my baby, nothing is too much. Times Square billboards for all, like, that's what I want. I would not be able to have that effective mindset to say, like, for this book, it's probably best not to do that. Certainly for mine, like, a billboard for my book is ludicrous. It's just not that kind of book. So.
Great. We have a question in the chat from Alita. Was it your idea for Everything Sad to be a children's book? And what did that evolution look like?
Yeah, so initially, no, it was an adult essay collection. I had, like dreams of the New Yorker in my head, and that was like 10 years ago. I wrote it, and it was particularly dry, and it was like Daniel trying to be an adult, and it didn't work out. so it wasn't very good. But the research that I did there, I literally just threw out that manuscript and kept the research files and began writing it from the perspective of the 12-year-old. And the reason that was frankly a note I got from a friend. It was like, a friend by the name of Stacey Barney. Theo, you know her.
No way.
She was having, we were having cupcakes, and I was whining, and she literally looked at me. He knows her. She's his editor. She's got this like great tone that that she strikes sometimes. That's basically your older sister telling you to get over yourself.
Oh, this was the nice Stacy. Okay.
And she just goes, what? Like, why are you like whining so much about this? Like, just write it from the moment it was most emotionally relevant. And I was like,
Had she read it, or was she just hearing
No.
mine? Oh man.
she was just hearing me mine, and she unlocked it. It's in the acknowledgments of the book. I was like, if Stacy hadn't made fun of me while over cupcakes, I would never have written this thing. From that perspective, immediately it unlocked the emotion of like, I'm not now an adult explaining to you about the history of Iran. I'm a 12-year-old begging for your sort of empathy, I guess. And so it totally, resonated with me. I mean, like the writing became better, I think, because it was suddenly more immediate. And that said, I think still it hovers in an odd place. In Italy and in the UK, it's being published as an adult book. So it's kind of it's not an easy category. And I think librarians have some trouble with it. They're like, who's this for? It wasn't obvious. I have trouble with that because I also again, these distinctions were built for marketing categories to figure out where things should be in the bookstore. So most of my favorite things don't have a real place. So I end up accidentally having that challenge. And something, there have been many, many times. One book has it's just piling up the rejections, and the answer is it's just that perennial question of so who's this for? And I'm like, I don't know. Cool people, I guess. You can't answer who's this for. It's for everybody who likes good things.
Do you think they could publish His Dark Materials or a series like that? Where would that go now?
It's a really good question. So it's really funny because those questions are so hard to answer because you're like, well, is it the classic, His Dark Materials? But yeah, it would have trouble. Their marketing teams would balk. It really would have to start from scratch.
This whole satire and takedown of Christianity and in this book with the 11-year-old protagonist. It's not that there aren't experimental works out there, stuff like that. It's just always a question of how many departments can you get on board, right? The editor, she's there with you. She loves your experiments. She's got that writer mindset, and she might be able to buy it for $10,000. But if she wants to buy it for $50,000 or $100,000, then she'd better get her executive editor on board. And if she wants it for 150, she better get the marketing team on board. You want it for 200, that publicity team better be because marketing is all the advertisements you buy. Publicity is all the advertisements you get for free, right? So it's marketing is I'll spend $50,000 and see who we can find. Publicity is nah, I'm not calling Oprah and calling in favors for you. That's it. I don't have ad buy. So the publicity coming on board is making promises, right? They're we can get you onto Good Morning America. That is, and at that point, there's a lot of things that have to be on board, right? You can't look not mediagenic enough, right? No, you have to have a lot on the table. And one of the first things you have to have on the table is a very, very targeted audience, right? Because honestly, they're picking the shows based on targeted audience. Are you going to go on
I don't know, Good Morning America or Reese Witherspoon's show, or, or Dr. Phil, or, whatever show you're going to go on, so to speak, Joe Rogan, like that implies a very specific audience. So as you sort of get into that, well, if this is what you want, but if you want like what Daniel wants, he just like, you have to start. His Dark Materials is a good example, right? You might get a marketing team balking and saying, see what happens, and then the editor sort of gets to take a flyer on it and buy it for maybe less, but then who gets some attention, win some awards, and all of a sudden things roll from there. Books as they come into the house have very different shapes of what the expectation is, right?
Yeah.
So you'll hear about it sometimes in categorization and really broadly as like lead titles. Sometimes some houses have other categorizations like make titles or find titles. And make title is a title that we think we can make, right? Like we spent a little amount on it, but we think we can.
We'll make it.
Yeah. No, make means we're gonna make it happen, as in
Right.
like we have a target audience, but nobody in that target audience yet knows who the author is.
And
So
what's a find?
Oh, a fine, same, make a fine are just two different houses. I happened to be at, they were the same kind of thing. Lead title, of course, is all the pieces are in place. We're gonna plunk down a lot of money and hope it makes a lot of money. And sometimes it's not great to be a lead title, right? Because as we just said earlier, right, if you are a lead title and you've got a big billboard up in Times Square, but you're not the kind of book that the people who walk around Times Square looking at billboards want, then you have $100,000 anchor around your neck, right? And sort of careers have been made with less. So, yeah.
Fascinating. Any other questions?
How would you say that a book is made, I guess, commercially accepted, right? Like a book like, what was that book called? It was like, Don't Give a Fuck, or like,
The Art of Not Giving a Fuck?
The Art of Not Giving a Fuck, right? Like something that was like, right in your face. The cover of the book was orange, you couldn't walk away from it. Everybody was like, yo, you got to read this book. Like, what would you say are like the makings of like a commercially successful book like that? And as an author, do you think it's, a thing to try to go controversial to start a career and then like, go into what you really want to do, right? Like anything to get some attention, because, any attention is good attention, right?
So I can answer that second part real easy, which is for sure start with where you want to start, because you will spend way too long before you can pivot. Like way too long. And honestly, even the pivot's too hard. Like the guy who, The Art of Not Giving a Fuck, if he wrote a literary YA novel, he's basically starting at ground zero. Like it's not that much better. He probably has a really good relationship with an agent who's really happy with him or her. I'm not even sure. But that's about it. Like it's not as you don't, I guess what I'm trying to say is the pivot, like Jack Welch writing a literary novel does not get him into the New Yorker. Like that's all there is to it. Like, so these worlds are so kind of separate that even success in one doesn't really mean skipping the line in the other. So by all means, start where you want to start small, even if you have to start small, and paying your dues. Within those 10 years, you'll be further along than if you skyrocket over here and jump. You know what I mean? So that's the first. On the category that book started is literally a category the publishers call sassy cussing, which there's a lot of books now. I mean like, and like stationary of like, live, laugh, fuck, don't give a fuck, go the fuck to sleep. And it's all, and yes, it's a zeitgeisty book. It's a gifty book. And in this case, it was a nonfiction self-help book, right? The way a lot of it happened was a mixture. Yes, he definitely had a, sort of sassy cussing kind of title. It captured a lot of attention. the designer did a good job. What did the designer do? Absolutely front load the F word with a couple asterisks, right? And by the way, it used to be called The Art of Not Giving a Fuck. Those asterisks came on board when Barnes and Noble read it and were like, you know, we could put this into every Barnes and Noble because we think it's really fun and exciting if you just put some asterisks on this thing. And so they do. So, I mean, the way nonfiction tends to happen like that is, yes, I mean, it's undeniable that a really fun title will get you there. Who Moved My Cheese back in the early aughts was a business book that did really well just because people, you know, Eats, Shoots, and Leaves was a grammar book that did really well. Right? It's just these titles kind of stick in your head. That was great. It had a platform, like the person was able to pitch. On nonfiction, your platform really matters, right? Like if you're pitching, I will teach you to be rich, you better already be rich, you know? If you are teaching like, you know, that's just the kind of basic platform type stuff. And it also means that you're probably going to go to conferences, and at conferences, because you're the expert, and you're going to sell more books. And so that's where the platform really matters. And then big buy, right? In this case, like Barnes and Noble came in really strongly. They wanted to put that book in the front of the store because they just thought it rebranded Barnes and Noble. Barnes and Noble used to look like a hunter's lodge. It was all like dark greens and like leather. It just looked like an old cabin space, and they wanted to appeal to young. They wanted to go female. They wanted to go young. They wanted to. And so it just hit all those breaks. Predicting that is really, really challenging. I think about this book, that for every book like that, there's a book, you know, there was a nonfiction book when I was young that tried to make it. It was called Think Naked. And I was like, ooh, so sassy, Think Naked. And it was actually from the story that people say about Jefferson, who like Jefferson or one of those founding folks who, used to like be naked for an hour a day for like focus and weird quirky behavior. And I'm like, okay. And so it was like, Think Naked. And he had, you know, and the book was trying to do what Art of Not Giving a Fuck did. And it totally flopped. And why? It's like, well, because if your whole thing is like, let me, you know, catch that attention, sometimes the camera's looking elsewhere. And you just don't get what you know. So in my takeaway, I'm really not trying to be like a shucks howdy sincerity guy by saying like, do the thing you love. Like you will succeed more doing the thing you love. Like you'll make more bank doing the thing you love. If the thing you love is standing up in front of a lot of people and doing like a tight 5 minutes on why not giving a fuck is awesome, and that's your TED talk, and that's actually something you dig, then for sure do that. But you know, something tells me whatever it is that, you know, the thing you're imagining going toward, it probably has an audience. It takes a really, really, really niche situation these days not to have any audience, where you're in a situation where you have to say to yourself, okay, I just got to go be famous, or I got to go super succeed before I'm allowed to do this. Well, maybe you know, just you have permission to do whatever it is you're waiting for, you know, to do, and you'll much prefer it. But there are a lot of people who try to make that pivot. You know, in publishing, you just kind of go, okay, our, you know, best-selling business guy wants to do a picture book. Like, and they might even do it because he makes them or she makes them that much money, but it's, you know, it's never the same.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, thanks so much, Nayeri. All right, guys, I think we've taken up enough of Daniel's time. I really appreciate your showing up for us, and it was a really fascinating talk. And I just appreciate the stuff that you're putting out in the world and the way you're pursuing it. It's just, you know, I think it's inspiring for a lot of us. So congrats, man. And
thank you. You know, if there's any sort of through thread or lesson to pick up in that, is it really is one of those scenarios where it's like there's a spot for everybody. It sometimes takes, you know, 11 years in the doghouse, but it's no one ever said publishing is as close to a marathon as it gets. But it's one of the only industries where you don't have to ask permission from anybody to open up that file.
yeah,
And that, you know, open it up, do it, show up for yourself, and before you know it, you know, if you ever in a situation, if you do want to publish, like writing and publishing are such different things, but if you do want to publish, there's nothing more magical than somebody paying you for those efforts, right? But fundamentally, the act of it is the thing to love, is the thing that everywhere else, like filmmakers spend 20 years asking permission to be creative, you know, painters have so much money to spend on the materials with which to make what they want. They have so much permission to ask. Writers don't have anything, any barrier, and which, by the way, is why we have so many interior barriers, right? It's really daunting when you have that much choice paralysis. But you know, I guess all I'm trying to say is like, give yourself that permission. You know, if there is nothing in the way, then give yourself the permission to write it, and it'll find its audience. It will. It really will. I'm so shocked that anybody would. I had spent basically a decade being like, all right, you know, I'm the handmaid to greatness, which is what editors call themselves, right? I will happily, you know, edit other people's work, and I guess I wasn't that happy. I was really dreaming dreams about my own, but it felt too niche. It felt too specific, too kind of just neither beast nor fowl, you know. But so my big lesson in all of that was really stick with it. I spent a lot of years trying to do all the other gimmicks, right? Pseudonyms, write to the trend, you know, go do, you know, something else, pivot, you know, through, like, I really did try all the super mercenary tactics and they all just failed until I got to the place where I was like, all right, fine, I'll just write what I want to write. That took a long time to learn. Someone should have slapped me earlier. Theo, you have permission, sir, to, you know, if I'm making such big mistakes, but
Oh man,
you're like, don't give me permission.
safe to say in COVID, I'm just saying, you know.
That's true, fair enough. Big talk, but thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, no, it was a real pleasure, man. Thanks
Thank
for
you so
stopping
much.
by, and hopefully you can
Thank you.
join us again one of these go rounds. And it was really, we'd love to hear what the next stop is on the RV or whatever.
Yeah, anytime. Thank you for having me.
Thanks
Okay.
so much. Yeah. Really helpful. Bye-bye.